Hello, everyone, and welcome to the EVN Disrupt podcast. My name is Nerses Ohanyan. I'm the editor of the Creative Tech section here at EVN Report. In this episode, we speak with Nerses Ohanyan, co-founder of HyeTech, about the organization's recent trip to India and their efforts to connect the Armenian tech ecosystem with the rest of the world. We explore the different and exciting initiatives in the country around space tech, including the Bazoomq Space Research Lab, the Kemurdzhian Challenge, and the Armenian Model Rocketry Association. Thank you for listening. Nerses, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course.
Nerses, last year around this time, we published a sort of in-depth profile on HyeTech and some of the work you've been doing over the last 12 years now. I think a lot of our listeners might have already read that, but for those who don't know, let's start with a little bit of your background. Tell us what HyeTech has been doing for the last decade.
Yeah, thank you, Nerses. HyeTech is a network of entrepreneurs and technologists that started in the Silicon Valley in 2011 that has spread across the United States, Armenia, Europe, has roughly 700 plus individuals who have participated in events or online communities, 200 or so entrepreneurs at various stages as part of the network. And the primary purpose of the network has been to connect people, have them learn from each other, have them give each other ideas, find resources, and build companies together over that course of time.
Right. And it's really served as a bridge between the US and Armenia in many ways. Over the last year or so, it seems like you guys have been taking on a little bit of a new format or maybe expanding some of the initiatives. Talk about what HyeTech is doing today.
You're right. A big function HyeTech ended up serving was really connecting US and Armenian tech ecosystems, primarily sort of Silicon Valley ecosystem with that of Armenia. I would say at this point, the tech network, the Armenian tech network internationally is pretty connected already.
Yeah.
It's, you would see entrepreneurs from Armenia in California, entrepreneurs from California in Boston, entrepreneurs from Boston in Armenia, and it's almost difficult to figure out who lives where anymore.
Right.
And so I'd say that's a pretty big success in that to be in tech, you have to be international. And so the phase that the network is in is that there are a number of later stage startups, a number of later stage entrepreneurs who are facing a very different set of challenges that I think the network faced, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, which is really around scaling, which is really around international expansion. And the world is obviously getting far more connected as well. And startup ecosystems are popping up all over the world. And those that have been around for a long time are maturing and getting to a very different level as well. And so what we're really focusing on now in terms of how we build on the network that we have is twofold. Is how do we incorporate others into the network? It was never an exclusively Armenian network, but obviously predominantly a network based on the Armenian tech diaspora and the Armenian tech community in Armenia. But we would like to obviously be more of a service to the rest of the world in terms of our connectedness, in terms of our ability to find problem solutions, find the right folks sort of almost anywhere in the world. As a result, we've been really focusing on taking a similar format, which is taking people from one region to the other, getting them to know each other, which was typically between the US and Armenia or Europe, and going to tech ecosystems that are really relevant for the Armenian tech ecosystem, but we don't have necessarily deep relationships with yet. And that includes India, for example, that includes Israel, that includes Estonia, that includes specific hubs in Europe. And so this year, what we started doing is actually planning trips, community building activities for our later stage entrepreneurs, and then traveling to these destinations. And we've just completed a trip to India to do so. And again, the approach is the same in that it is all based on building personal connections, finding people who are like-minded, have shared values, finding ways that we can help them, finding ways that we can get resources from the network that we're connecting to, and then through those personal relationships, then find what are the right business relationships to build.
This is kind of like a later stage EIP, if you will.
EIP was an entrepreneur immersion program focused on earlier stage entrepreneurs, and the hypothesis there was as you're starting to build your company, when you're in idea stage, product market fit stage, there are a number of mistakes you're going to make, and actually exposure to Silicon Valley is really critical for you to accelerate that learning. And the immersion program took entrepreneurs primarily from Armenia, but not limited to, from Europe and other places in the US, and took them to Silicon Valley for a 10-day program, Silicon Valley and Los Angeles, for very sort of intense immersion so that they get to see and really understand and make conclusions for themselves and know what they need to pursue there. In that same vein, this is really an immersion program for later stage entrepreneurs to kind of go explore, discover, understand, sort of have a feel for the place, the culture, the technology, the ways of working. So yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't even thought of it as a EIP for later stage entrepreneurs, but effectively what it has become.
Right.
Yes.
You mentioned a number of ecosystems that you guys have outlined as the first ones to visit. When you're thinking about which ones to bring Armenian entrepreneurs to, but not necessarily only Armenian entrepreneurs, how do you evaluate which ecosystem is the right one to connect Armenia's ecosystem with? What are the metrics or what are you looking for there?
At the beginning, I think there are certain more obvious low-hanging fruit. So I think that's, but the criteria there tend to be, is it a mature ecosystem in some sense, right? In whatever vector. It could be talent, it could be specific niche technologies that are relevant. That's a really important criteria. And also how relevant do we think it is for the Armenian tech ecosystems? How closely connected could it be? So regional physical location is certainly one aspect. So we're right now looking at, okay, what are the really relevant tech hubs that are physically close to Armenia? Because our ecosystem between US and Armenia is already strong. We believe by connecting to ecosystems that are physically closer to Armenia that our ecosystem here can connect to, then we can bring more value to the US network. And also the US network can bring more value to those other networks through Armenia because of the physical sort of proximity. So that's certainly a criteria there as well. So to kind of give you the reason that India was the first choice, was the primary topics we were thinking about were talent. And India is known for having invested for a long, long time, probably 10, 20 years more than Armenia has had the opportunity to in its technology sector, and not just in building technology, but also building a Silicon Valley culture around that technology. I think that's largely due to the Indian expat or diaspora communities in Silicon Valley that have been doing this same work for 30 years. Organizations like TIE, the Indus Entrepreneurs, and many others have been doing this work. That was the criteria for choosing India. Sort of, okay, this is a mature talent hub. If you kind of look at the top 10 tech hubs in the world, India is absolutely in that list.
And I guess you're also not just looking for tech hubs, but like tech entrepreneurship hubs. Was that right? Or
yes, I think we are looking for hubs where there are entrepreneurship is either already really vibrant or is picking up in a major way, because there's clearly a lot of places where technology is happening. But for us, it's really important that we're talking to entrepreneurs and startups as well. And then the other criteria is, are there technologies that we on the Armenian tech ecosystem are trying to really build towards or trying to build on from what we have, and what the ecosystem we should be connecting to, either to pass on our knowledge and sort of provide solutions in, or be able to connect to world-class technology providers there so that we can be competitive as well. So India is also very interesting in that perspective, especially Hyderabad, where we went to. They're incredibly strong in space technology, in aerospace, in healthcare, and so those were all very important areas for the network.
Before we dive deeper into the India trip specifically, as you're connecting with these hubs, you're also in a sense selling the Armenian ecosystem, because you have to show them the value of connecting with Armenia, right? What's the pitch there?
Part of the goal with the trip is to actually figure out what the right message is, to actually really understand where is the value that we can provide. Obviously, we have some hypotheses. So one is, as a tech ecosystem here, we've had the fortunate disadvantage of never having to really build for a local market. And so the entire tech ecosystem here has developed thinking global market. And that primarily means US market and European market. And the pitch to, for example, the ecosystem in India is, let us be yet another avenue for you to be able to launch into the West, right? Whether it's testing your products, whether it's having entrepreneurs be part of the Armenian ecosystem here, and as a result get connected more effectively with the US and European ecosystems and entrepreneurs. And that has resonated quite well. And then the other pitch is, Armenia is small, sort of similar fortunate disadvantage in that certain technologies, certain things can be implemented here, almost countrywide, faster than maybe some cities in India.
Yeah.
Right. And so for a country like India that's trying to develop incredible technology to support its society, having a place where some of those things can be launched and shown to be effective can become really useful for them to go back and be implemented in a much wider sense. For example, in space technology, right, the infrastructure necessary in Armenia to make something happen is much smaller than in India. And you can kind of show that a technology that's developed in India could be influential globally. And you can do that by implementing that in a country like Armenia before exporting it out to even bigger places. So those are the two areas I think that our pitch has been sort of focused on.
So take us through the India trip. Tell us about what you guys exactly were doing there.
Actually, if you don't mind, let me just add one more thing to the last question about going to India and sort of representing Armenia, right? Representing the Armenian ecosystem. It was really important that we're not going 1 or 2 or 3 people at a time.
Right.
It's really important that when you are, going and exploring and trying to connect, you're taking a large number of folks who clearly are dedicated to helping each other and helping, their own community. And that shows only when you can see that group working together. And so that was one of the reasons why this isn't virtual. This is one of the reasons it's not just like identifying certain business opportunities and sending specific people there. It's taking mature entrepreneurs who've had life experience, who've built businesses, who have expertise, and then going to one location together to showcase sort of the variety of technologies, of use cases that the ecosystem covers. And I think that was also highly effective in sort of showing the connectedness of the Armenian network, and that just because we're small doesn't mean we can't be impactful.
Right.
And that was actually quite clear for us when we went to India. We had 16 entrepreneurs and ecosystem builders traveling. We also had some families with us as well, because it was a community building sort of trip. It was a trip where we also got to spend a lot of time together and exchange ideas and really got to relax and reset. So we went to Hyderabad and Telangana. Telangana is one of the, I believe it's the youngest state of India. It only formed 8 years ago or so, and Hyderabad being the capital, and they've been investing quite heavily in their technology infrastructure from the government sort of top level. The beginning of the state that they had decided that technology was going to be their primary focus.
Is it one of India's larger tech hubs?
It is becoming one. It is clearly not where, for example, the Bangalore tech ecosystem is, but in certain areas like defense, space tech, and aerospace and healthcare, it is number one in India as well. Our discovery there was that a lot of the right investments over the last 5 to 10 years and have gone from having sort of very small tech ecosystem to having an incredibly vibrant tech ecosystem. And as that trajectory continues, it's likely going to be an incredibly important hub in India and around the world. So we got to spend 4 days in Hyderabad, and then we traveled to sort of really understand India a little bit more and actually get to take the sights in and enjoy and get to know the culture and the people as well, and actually spend time with each other in a more serene place as well. So that was the gist of the trip.
Interesting. And were you guys meeting with like local startups and companies there?
So the story of why we chose to go to Hyderabad is because one of our network members is the CEO and founder of Skyroot Aerospace, which is a startup based in Hyderabad. It is the first space tech company, private space tech company in India. It's the first space tech private company in India to work formally with the Indian Space Research Organization. They are the fastest startup to have launched a rocket into space in the world. And we had the pleasure of hosting them in Armenia a couple of years ago for a HyeTech showcase. And as he got to see the Armenian ecosystem here and got to connect to the individuals here, as we were expressing our desire to go explore India at the time, he invited us to go to Hyderabad. Just because is where he is, and he knows the ecosystem there, and he really believes that's going to be a really core place to be in India. And so what we ended up having the pleasure of doing is connecting with his network when we were there. He connected us with an organization called T-Hub, which is a public-private established organization in Hyderabad, established by the Telangana government, that effectively facilitates the entire ecosystem. So T-Hub is the largest innovation campus in the world. It houses a dozen or so organizations, including public-private ones, corporate incubators. There are incredible sort of structures, the largest prototyping facility in India. The Novartis's campus is in the next door. It's a very big location where they're really where they've been building this technology ecosystem. And so they facilitated all of our introductions where we got to meet, I would say, the full spectrum of the entrepreneurship and the technology ecosystem there, from early stage founders to later stage founders to investors who advise their own startups, to the CEOs or key individuals across all of these public-private organizations, things like organizations responsible for taking technology from universities and making them
knowledge transfer.
T-Works, for example, which is the prototyping facility, TSIC, which deals with grassroots innovation, Rich, which deals with taking sort of really core technologies, advanced technologies, and really commercializing them, as well as multinationals, right? So we met with Maruti Suzuki, which is Suzuki's Indian division. It's a separate entity in India. It produces, I think, around roughly 80% of the cars that are driven in India. They have an innovation lab that they were very interested in talking about, finding out what technologies we have to offer that they could incorporate into their technologies. Carillon, which is a healthcare company. So the entire full spectrum of sort of what it takes to actually build a startup. We got to have sessions with entrepreneurs on go-to-market, their experience of building startups and businesses, both technology businesses, but also traditional sort of packaged goods, for example, healthcare product goods, really trying to understand the dynamics of India. And also we also got to meet delegations that came from Australia, individuals who came from other parts of India, and really understood how they're trying to build their bridge with the world as well.
Yeah, fantastic. One of the things that you even mentioned a couple times in this conversation so far is that it's a space tech hub, and there's a sort of a focus on developing space technology. In Armenia, there's sort of a small, tiny little space tech ecosystem, it seems like, that's sort of developing. One of the players is Bazoomq, which is a space tech research lab, you could say. Then there's the Kemurdzhian Youth Space Challenge. And recently there's been some buzz about maybe some more initiatives launching in that direction. I know you guys have an event in Glendale next week that will speak more about this. First, before we dive into some of these initiatives, maybe tell us, because I think a lot of people's minds might be, why is space tech important? Why is it relevant for Armenia? Why is this something we should be focused on?
Thank you for asking that question. Yeah. It's come up quite a bit because it's both futuristic and in some sense, right, it can appear like a luxury, why does it matter? Yeah. And I think it's always a good question to be asking anytime you're investing, your time into building ecosystems. I'd say that I think about it in two ways. I think about it as, what are the technologies that are going to continue to allow us to be competitive in the world moving forward? What are the economies developing in the world that we must be prepared to be part of, that, whether today or tomorrow are going to become predominant economies? And the space economy is an incredibly important one that's developing. It already exists. Right. And it already, does not require you to be physically connected. Right? Your geographic location is not a barrier to go to space. You can go to space anywhere in the world, right? So we've had the disadvantage in Armenia of being landlocked. Right. This is a vector in which we are not locked. Right. Right. And so it's really important for us to understand where we can play a role in the space tech ecosystem. And it's such a huge ecosystem that there are many, many roles to play in space tech. So that's sort of the first criteria to say, let's invest in something that is actually going to ensure that we have a future.
And when you say space economy, what exactly do you mean? Do you mean like satellite launches, or?
It is a very large problem space, right? So even, crop monitoring, right, is part of space technology. Right. Garbage collection is going to be part of space technology. Processing data, building new communication technologies between satellites, all of those things that are going to support the overall space sort of exploration or utilizing space for, whether it's for material collection or for supporting things down on the ground, there are infrastructures that need to be built to support all of those things. So it doesn't just have to be launching satellites.
Right.
As these satellites are being launched, technologies are being developed on these satellites or these CubeSats that are doing other functions. There's machine learning technologies, there are communication technologies, there are imaging technologies that are being developed as part of the space tech ecosystem. So it can be a number of those things. I think there's even blockchain processing technologies, etc. Right? So anything can be launched into space, can be processed, and finding ways to add value to that as it's growing and growing quite fast is really important, I think, for us.
I cut you off. You were about to say your second point there.
The second point is, when you look at space technology, you realize all the technologies that develop there are incredibly critical and supportive of other technologies that are crucial today. As I said, agriculture, for example, right, is incredibly important for us to be able to monitor crops, understand weather conditions, monitor events that are happening, especially in remote regions of Armenia where it may not be always accessible. Right. Communication technologies, control systems, sort of aerospace across the board. So by developing a space tech ecosystem, you're also developing skill sets and technologies and underlying infrastructure that is critical to other technologies as well that we must be building also. So that's the reason we think space tech is so important for us as a community to really get behind, because it allows us to bring in researchers and bring in knowledge into the ecosystem that is incredibly unique and incredibly applicable across the ecosystem.
Right. What might first pop into people's heads when they think of space tech is like the traditional launches and things of that nature. What you're saying is that it doesn't end with the launch. Post-launch, there's a lot of things like developing applications based on the satellite tech that has been deployed, data analysis, things of that nature. There's a big sort of IoT space intersection being sort of developed. We spoke about that a little bit last year. When thinking about Armenia's role in that, how do you sort of see that starting? How do you see that blossoming? Because it would be hard to imagine rocket launching from Armenia anytime soon. So what would sort of be the first players and what would they be doing?
The first phase is really learning the end-to-end, right? Really understanding how to take an idea, build it, and then put it into space. And that's really what Bazoomq Space Research Lab has been really focusing on doing. Because as you build, for example, you start developing manufacturing capabilities, supply chain, understanding how these devices operate. And you're absolutely right. It doesn't end with the space launches. In fact, space launches is only the beginning, right? It's just the gateway for you to get into space tech. Right. It is not space tech itself, right? And space launches are becoming quite commoditized at this point, right? So it's not necessary for you to be doing rocket launches for you to be fully involved in the ecosystem there. And so what Bazoomq is doing is effectively putting a schedule in place that's sort of reliable and predictable, such that you can take any idea that you may want to deploy, build it, put it on a CubeSat, and make sure it gets into space, and then you can experiment with it. And so which applications we end up building, I think, are to be determined. I suspect highly that, image processing is going to be something really important, sort of monitoring, understanding aspects of the world and acting on it is going to be really, really important. There's sort of incredible new camera technologies that are being developed that we can start potentially deploying and utilizing. There are inter-satellite communication technologies that are being developed. Armenia has an incredible strength, I think, across other technologies, but in machine learning, computer vision. We have a lot of underlying unique technologies that have been developed here in Armenia. I suspect applying those in the space tech environment is probably where we'll probably see a lot of wins over a long period of time. But we're still at a point where we're discovering where our unique advantage is going to have to be.
I guess an interesting way of thinking about it is that these launch companies that have popped up over the last few decades, the SpaceXs of the world, have kind of almost created a platform for other smaller ecosystems that don't have the capability to do launches to participate in the space economy, I guess you would say. You mentioned Bazoomq. I guess this is really the first avenue for Armenia to build some of that capacity. Tell us a little bit more about what Bazoomq is and what exactly the mission is there.
Yeah, Bazoomq is a space research lab. So its mission is similar to any research lab, which is to do groundbreaking research and enable researchers to effectively conduct the research give them shared infrastructure so that they can conduct the research in space that they wish to do. Right? That's the ultimate vision of Bazoomq, is becoming the place where new ideas can come and build and deploy it into space, so that you don't have to take that whole idea from end to end yourself. Right? It's to actually really learn how to take it from an idea phase into implementation, and then having the network of potential partners to allow you to then take those ideas and then spin them off into startups after the fact. Right? So that's really the idea, is to become the platform for startups and larger companies, hopefully in the future, to be able to utilize the skill sets that they're helping their folks to develop to then build full-on products around. The ultimate vision is to generate startups that actually support world problems, but in its activity, it's to actually take some of those ideas and then put them to the test, right? Actually build proof of concepts of these things in the future. So that's really the goal of Bazoomq, and that means bringing researchers from around the world, establishing connections with India, with Austria, with the US, and also sort of all of these platforms that exist, like the launch platforms, SpaceX, Skyroot Aerospace, to work out all of the ways to work together so that utilizing the ecosystem that exists in the world becomes seamless for somebody who wants to go experiment in space.
Can you shed some light on, in India, where there is a more of a growing space tech hub, as they've matured, what are some of the applications, some of the companies that have popped up? What's something that maybe in a longer roadmap for Armenia we can expect to see? While you guys were there, did you guys see any obvious opportunities for collaboration? Or
yeah, absolutely. The unique advantage that the space startups, space tech startups, and aerospace startups that have in India is that they get to benefit from an incredible history of space exploration by India itself. The Indian Space Research Organization has built incredible infrastructure that supports these startups. So even Skyroot Aerospace does its launches off of the ISRO pad, right? So that allows them not to have to build a lot of the things themselves, and so that's a huge advantage that they have. So first and foremost, in terms of opportunities for Armenia, the more that we can actually connect with and make use of some of the infrastructure that the Indian Space Research Organization, India as a government, has built, that's already a huge opportunity for us to accelerate our space technology and aerospace technology. What was inspiring before even going to India is reading some of the literature from India about its ambition to democratize space, meaning to make space available for others who may not have all the resources that, for example, they have or the US has and other countries who can build all that infrastructure. So there's a desire to make this available. And obviously you have to do it the right way. There's an incredible amount of proprietary technology that gets developed to do that. But their mission is to make sure that the world has access to this. So that's sort of number one, is sort of infrastructure support in some way. And then in India, we saw it's just such a variety of technologies being developed around aerospace. So, one incredibly exciting startup that we saw was just developing flight simulators. Flight simulators, right? For 360 flight simulators, so that a pilot can actually simulate being in an inverted plane, right, and going through all these transitions and not be limited by only 3 degrees of motion. We saw technologies around, for example, incredibly small lens technologies to support image capture from space, or again, it's not limited to space, but obviously space is a big target for that. So again, just incredible hardware technologies to support space tech, things that we can incorporate into our research, into our startups, into our sort of production line as we try to solve larger problems, right? So we don't have to go and invent every single part of that chain. There's incredible technologies that have been developed there that, if we just add one piece of technology here, now we can do more with. There's a number of companies focusing on manufacturing, right? 3D printed engines and testing equipment. One of the things that's interesting for us is their technologies are being built also to be very cost effective because they have to build for such a large scale. And their competitive advantage from, let's say, the US and Europe is cost as well, which is very beneficial for us because we also have to be very cost efficient as we build some of these technologies as well. Yeah, so I would say the thing that we can learn from the most and start to build on top of most is the manufacturing capabilities that India has, especially in this space. As I said, right, space tech being a supportive technology, manufacturing is something that's incredibly important, hardware manufacturing for Armenian tech. And space tech forces you
Right.
to manufacture, to build things. And they have incredible capacity of manufacturing any and all parts of that and bring that in. But they also have incredible amount of data that they've already captured. A lot of their startups, or especially a lot of their infrastructure players, have captured a lot of data that can give us the ability to start doing work and adding value without necessarily having to capture all that data ourselves. So that's also another aspect. So manufacturing data and then specialized devices to then incorporate into our space tech offerings, I would say, are the three areas that we should look at.
Yeah. One of the stories that I think maybe has sort of gone, I don't know if unnoticed is the right word, but probably should have gotten more attention is, I think, as we saw the AI boom over the last, it's been a while, but really the hype over the last sort of 6 months, Armenian startups were able to really capitalize on a lot of that because a lot of that expertise was built up in the 10 years prior when that wasn't necessarily as exciting as it is today. So even though the space economy might not be where things like AI and other tech verticals are today, it's great to be ready for it when in 10 maybe or even sooner it becomes a much more important aspect of the overall global tech ecosystem. That's really fantastic.
I would actually say because AI is where it is right now, it's hard to say, but a large percentage of problems that was going to take incredible amount of technology to support are becoming already supportable.
Yeah.
Right. So it's becoming a lot easier to build software. I mean, a lot easier. It's an understatement to say how much easier it's become to build software and to build solutions for the world. And so you also have to think about where can you build sustainable value? Because I think one of the excitements, but also one of the fears around AI is you might have an idea today, build it tomorrow, and the next day it's invalidated because the next language learning model update just takes care of that problem by default, right? So this entire thing you might have, entire companies are now irrelevant because, you can solve that whole problem with a prompt.
Yeah.
You can't do that in hardware, at least not yet.
Right.
You can do that, so you really have to pick problems to solve
that are defensible,
right? And space tech is actually, I think, going to become one of those in aerospace and controls things, things that deal with physics are things that you just have to build. And in fact, AI just makes it incredibly easy for you to then build all the solutions within it.
Yeah.
But you have to be in a space where it can't just be disrupted by a software update somewhere, which is effectively what's happening. So, the point you made is incredibly valid. And I think we have to learn that lesson even more seriously now. That it's even not even about being ready for what's coming in 10 years. It's that, once all the, let's say, lower order problems are solved through ML, what's going to be left to solve?
Right.
And I think in the next few years, this is going to be
you want to make sure that
the
you're
most
there.
important thing to be solving for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us about the Kemurdzhian Youth Space Challenge. What is it?
Yeah, this was just an opportunity that came up when founder of Skyroot, Pawan Chandra, was in Armenia, building relationships with Bazoomq, building relationships with the entrepreneur network here. And he opened the opportunity for us to put a device on a test rocket, on a rocket that they were launching into space. It's going to go up and then come down. It was not a rocket that was going to launch a satellite. It's a precursor to that. It so happened that in India there was going to be some activities happening to have a device be built onto that rocket by school kids there. And he graciously offered to do the same for a device built in Armenia. And so Bazoomq, HyeTech came together. We reached out to our entrepreneurship network and decided to launch the Kemurdzhian Youth Space Challenge. Kemurdzhian is a Armenian scientist from the 60s and 70s, from the Soviet era. He had worked on the lunar lander and on the Mars lander. Incredibly influential figure and really somebody who sort of gives us that pedigree in space tech. It was his 100th anniversary. And so we hosted a competition for students, youth in Armenia, to build a device to go onto that rocket and to go into space. Again, this was all done by the community. The community came together. Bazoomq organized the competition, supported the trainers and the team leads. and a number of teams from Yerevan, Gümri participated, and the device was built. The group Ad Astra from IPE School won the competition, and then the Ad Astra team and the IAS team also collaborated to kind of incorporate some of the final stuff together, and together submitted that device to be sent into space.
What did they build?
They built a device that had a number of sensors on it, including an ozone sensor that could, and also could test sort of its position in space as it went up into space and then came down. So this device was then put into the rocket in November of last year, and it was launched successfully, went into space and came back. It was two firsts. It was the first private rocket launch in India, and it was the first device that was built in Armenia to go to space.
Oh, wow.
Both happening together.
And it was done by these students.
It was done by these students. It was facilitated by the Space Research Lab, launched by a founder in our network in India. Right. So it was all people believing that it's really important for this to happen. It's really important to inspire kids to aspire to these things, that it's possible. If that doesn't prove to you that space is accessible, right, that a 12-year-old kid in Armenia can build something and then see it go to space.
Yeah.
Just
I thought
a
you meant
few months
university
later.
students.
No.
Oh, wow. Okay.
No.
Wow, that's fantastic. It also really highlights the importance of these networks that you're building, because putting aside where it starts from, but it requires both the network in India to be able to facilitate the launch and the challenge, and then the students here that are building it. That's fantastic.
And not only is it showing that, hey, kids can do this,
Yeah.
which is really important, because now, you can realistically say, to a teenager growing up in Armenia or anywhere in the world, hey, you should think about space.
Yeah.
Like, you should think about what you can do in space, because you can. And in that process, and this is incredible thanks to the kids who came in and they didn't know what was going to happen, right? This was an out of the field, just sort of, okay, is this real? Right? But they jumped in and they got really excited. They really worked incredibly hard on this. They had great ideas. They executed. But what they allowed us to do is they allowed us to actually execute a space launch end to end. That's really what happened, right? Two international organizations got to collaborate, put agreements in place, figure out their logistics, figure out their testing protocols, we learned a lot of lessons in that process. So, not only do we get to help kids do something cool, but they helped us mature our process. And so we can move much more quickly and more confidently in building bigger things. And this is where Bazoomq and Skyroot are talking to each other. Well, Bazoomq is also doing a launch with SpaceX soon.
Was Bazoomq involved in the satellite launch last year?
You would have to ask Bazoomq there, because all of the space tech labs and players collaborate and work with each other. So I believe so, but I can't tell you how. Because the satellite launch that happened last year was a satellite that was bought and then launched for Armenia. So that's an incredible accomplishment for the government. And I know we've worked with those entities in that process, but I can't speak to more detail than that. What Bazoomq does is very large. Right. There's a lot of work that they're doing. And with HyeTech, we just get to hyper focus on a few of the initiatives that they're pushing forward. So I can't speak to the details of that, but they are specifically planning a CubeSat launch that they're building in Armenia.
What's a CubeSat?
Also. So CubeSat is a sort of a standard type of satellite. It's a small box that you get to build as many of as you'd like. So you can take 2, 4, 8 of them and big something big, or you can have something small. Point of this CubeSat is that it can be placed in a rocket. It has interfaces with the rocket, so it knows what's happening as it's going up. When the rocket releases it, the satellite can then stay in space. Yeah. And then can communicate with the ground station. So that's what a CubeSat is. What goes into the CubeSat, the payload, can be sort of anything. Right. So yeah, CubeSat is a pretty standard technology that's being used across space tech.
Fantastic. And then the sort of third little layer of this growing space tech ecosystem is the Armenian Model Rocketry Association, which is an opportunity for kids' school to get involved with building model rockets and things of that nature. Does Bazoomq work with them in that?
Absolutely. So both the Model Rocketry Association and Bazoomq were, I believe, founded by the Armenian Aerospace Society.
Right, yeah.
So it's the same people doing both. So they're teaching kids how to build rockets. And so Model Rocket Society is an incredible initiative to kind of put the thought and the skill set of launching rockets, and again, just thinking about space and thinking about aerospace into the hands of kids all around Armenia. And I'd say it's probably one of the most inspirational things that I've seen myself. And kids love it, parents love it, kids come back to it year over year over year. And we're, with Bazoomq, also looking at ways to scale that, tap our network for funding so that we can put that into as many cities and villages across Armenia. Even connected with companies in India who produce certain technologies for model rockets. So we're trying to also find, best-in-class technologies to bring in and incorporate into the model rocketry. So it's, again, another channel to bring in great technology here so that, kids here don't always have to think about building everything themselves, but they can also think about accessing the resources that they have around the world and build cooler and cooler things.
Yeah. There's a student that I tutor here who is part of the Model Rocketry Association, and he's preparing to apply to aerospace engineering programs and stuff in the US now. And it's so cool to see every week when he comes and talks about what they've been doing and stuff, and 3D printing these parts for rockets and stuff. The inspiration and the motivation to continue it is so obvious. It's a really fantastic initiative.
And thanks for saying that, because it proves the very first point, the question you asked about why space, right? A kid has to learn 3D printing
absolutely,
to do model rocketry because they're thinking about space. But in that process, they learn 3D printing, which is going to be applicable in so many areas of their life.
And just general engineering, right?
Yeah, general engineering. Engineering. My background is mathematics, aerospace engineering, and mechanical engineering, and I've been a computer scientist professionally for the last 20 years.
It's kind of like a coming back for you, right?
Yeah, there's a different skill set in building hard engineering. And it's an incredible skill set building software. I mean, it's an entirely different complexity. It's a different type of complexity. But it is a skill set that's really important to have, and I think the world is pointing us in the direction of harder engineering in the future. And so this is really building up that capacity for us as a country.
It's fantastic. Nerses, our last question. We sort of have this traditional question where we ask about the future. Where do you hope to see this small but growing initiatives in space tech in 5 to 10 years, let's say?
In 5 years, I hope that we as a nation have a vision for ourselves around space. I personally have a vision that there's going to be an Armenian city on Mars someday. Doesn't mean that there's Armenian on that city. That city is run by our Armenian network and becomes another way that we get to connect the world and service the world.
Right.
So I think for us to see a vision for ourselves as a people, as a nation, that goes beyond today and our current struggles is something that I hope to see for us in 5 years. Sort of a mental shift of where we can be. But that needs to be supported by some real things. And I would like to see in 5 years, especially around space tech, that we actually have unicorn startups in Armenia in space tech. That's a minimum requirement for us to be able to say we provide worldwide value in space tech. So I definitely see that as a place that I like to see in the future. And that means having enough infrastructure in Armenia around space tech, aerospace and defense technologies, including cybersecurity, it's sort of all of that, and it is connected, to be able to have an idea, build a prototype, commercialize it and scale it, all by utilizing the Armenian infrastructure here. And it's connected infrastructure globally, but relying on infrastructure here. That's my hope in the next 5 years.
Let's hope to see it. Thank you so much for joining us today, Nerses.